Today's daf we're going to be learning is Nazir Daf Zayin. Today's daf is sponsored by the Tenenbaum family in loving memory of Miriam's father, Jacob Zemsky, Zichrono Livracha, Yaakov Yitzchak ben Moshe Nachum Alevi, Zichrono Livracha, on his 19th Yahrzeit. He embodied Ahavat Yisrael. It was manifested in causes both for the Klal and even more so through his helping so many on the Prat level. May his inspiration continue to guide us to Heinish Matot Tzura B'Tzura Chayim. Today's daf is sponsored in memory of Dr. Atara Twersky, Zichrono Livracha, who passed away this past week. Yehi Zichra Baruch. Okay, we're going to get started with a quick review of yesterday's daf. It's a bit of a complicated daf in terms of there's a lot of back and forth, but as usual, we'll try to organize it and pare it down so that in the end, you'll have a concept of what went on in the daf and not get lost in all the details. I'll try to keep getting you back on track. We started with the statement of Rabbi Yaval in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, who said, this was at the bottom of Lamed Hamad Bet. All Isurim Shebetorah and Heter Mitzaref L'Isur other than Nazir. It's a unique halacha by Nazir because it says Mishrat, that the wine is soaked into the bread. That teaches you that if you eat a kazayit of the bread itself, even though you don't have a kazayit of the Isur, of the wine, you're going to be liable. That's a unique halacha by Nazir. Comes the Ari and says, no, it appears in other places as well. It's not unique to Nazir. Presumably, this applies across the board. And that's what Abai is thinking also. So therefore, when Rabbanit comes and paskins like Rabbi Yochanan and teaches his halacha, Abai comes and starts attacking him and says, what are you talking about? We see it comes up in other places. And how do we see that? We see that Rabbi Yochanan even said it because Rabbi Yochanan said in this case of the Shvul Yom, I'm not going to get into all the details again, but since the Bazar would touch this truma combination, which is clearly not a Nazir issue, you would get lashes, and we're assuming it's Heter Mitzaref L'Isur, to which Rabbanit says it's not Heter Mitzaref L'Isur. It's a case where he ate a kazayit of the Isur. It's not like he ate a kazayit of the mixture, which only had, right, Heter and Isur mixed together. No, he ate a kazayit of the actual Isul. If he ate the mixture over a course of 9 minutes, then he would have consumed an entire kazayit. And that's why you get lashes, because he ate an entire kazayit of Isser, and then this has nothing to do with Heter Mitzaref L'Isur. Okay, again, Heter Mitzaref L'Isur means we're going to take Heter and Isser, we're going to eat a kazayit of a combination of them. Even though you haven't eaten a kazayit of Isul, it's going to be forbidden. So comes Rabbi Yochanan, says that's not what it's talking about. To which Rabbi started on a whole slew of questions. According to them, what you're saying, if you eat kazayit, that's a Torah law. If so, what about these 3 cases he brought in? We're in the middle of the third, and each time Rabbanit answers why that's not a question for him, okay? And then the last one he said is because it's all a Rabbanan issue, because it was truma of spices. Truma of spices is only rabbin, okay? And therefore, don't tell me why are they lenient here if it's a Torah law, because it's not the Heter Mitzaref L'Isur would have been a Torah. I'm sorry, the Kazayit B'chtei Achila Pras would have been a Torah law, but this isn't a Torah law. This is rabbinic truma. That's why we're lenient. So then we ended with this case where you had 2 baskets, one of truma, one of chulin, and then into it falls a pile of grain, right? We're talking about grains. The whole thing is grains. Into it falls a pile of grains, one of truma, one of chulin. Each one falls into one. We're not sure which was which. We can assume, right, lenient. Say the chulin went into the chulin, the truma went into the truma, same as the previous case, just a little bit different because it's no longer truma derabanan, it's truma doraita because it's on grains. So to which we now say, right, if you're going to say, I'll start from the second to last line in Lamed Vav Amud Bet, if you're going to say Yisagadata Kazayit B'chtei L'Chila Pras is doraita, if you're going to say Kazayit in Chila Pras will be doraita. How could people possibly eat this mixture? It's got Heter and Isser, it's going to be a problem. Okay, so how can we possibly say we're lenient? And we say, maybe the truma fell into the chulin, but let's just assume not. So to which Abai has to say why, according to him, this is what is his whole theory? Remember, his whole theory is, you have to keep remembering this. Heter Mitzaref L'Isser, he agrees with Rabbanit that Heter Mitzaref L'Isur, he just thinks it's across the board. So to him is also going to be a problem. That was what Rabbanit answered him last time. You think you're claiming my problem is a doraita problem, and how could they be lenient? Your problem's also a doraita problem, and how could they be lenient? To which we resolved it by saying it's not doraita to either one. So here comes Abai and says, this is not going to be a problem according to my theory. Why? And now all of a sudden we're going to say something that you're going to say, why didn't we just say this earlier? It would have been made much more sense, but okay. They didn't answer it earlier because maybe they had other answers. Abaye says, I think the issue is heter mitzaref l'isur, and therefore, this is not going to be an issue. Why is this permitted, even though it's heter mitzaref l'isur? And here we're going to learn something that you think, why didn't they mention this earlier? If the chulin was greater than, what's permitted was greater than what's forbidden, then regular laws of nullification kick in. Heter mitzaref l'isur has to be when they're equal or the isur is more than. So let's take the wine case. You have wine soaked in bread and you eat a kazayit of the bread. It has to be that the amount of wine was equal or greater than the amount of bread, because otherwise there would be an overpowering of the heter, and then you wouldn't say heter mitzaref l'isur, because the heter, certainly on a Torah level, maybe rabbinic, you would say it's an issue, but on a Torah level, and you might have other issues here, but you don't have heter mitzaref l'isur, because for heter mitzaref l'isur to work, which again, you say, why didn't you mention this earlier? In order for it to work, because the other case also wasn't equal, it would have to be equal. Okay, so you theoretically could have answered this before, but we had a different answer there, which was just truma de Rabbanan anyway. But l'didach da'amart mishum deika kazayit b'chtech lapras ki nefishe chulin may have. But this issue of there being more chulin than truma is not relevant. Wouldn't negate kazayit b'chtech lapras from working. So back to the question, kazayit b'chtech lapras doesn't matter if there's more heter than isur, because you're still eating a kazayit of isur within the amount of time that it's forbidden. And according to you, that would be a Torah law. So again, when it comes to this mixture where you have more chulin, right, more non-sanctified and a little bit of sanctified, but according to you, if you would eat a kazayit within 9 minutes of this whole combination, you would end up with an issue. And what do you see here? We're not worried about that issue. So why not? To which he answers, Amalei, same type of answer as before. Now, while it's true that truma on grains is Torah law, but not anymore, okay? And this is a whole diun, and because we have a long daf, I'm not going to even go into this at all, but there's actually a machloket about what is truma nowadays, Torah law or rabbinic law, because we no longer, again, temple around, there's all sorts of issues that come up. The majority of the Jews are in Israel. There's all sorts of questions that are raised about this issue. I'm not going to get into all the details about the machloket, but there's a machloket, and basically he says, I hold truma is to Rabbanan nowadays anyway, and that makes the whole thing rabbinic, and that's why we're lenient. Moving on, okay? So we resolved the third question that Rav Dimi asked, that was questioned by Abaye, specifically on this line of how he explained Rabbi Yochanan that the zar who eats this will be lokeh, and he says it's not because of heter mitzaref l'isur, it's because of he ate a whole kazayit of isur within the time period of this 9 minutes. Again, I'm just assuming the process 9 minutes, even though there's a machloket about it. And each time we brought some other case where we seem to see that it would be a kazayit b'chtech lapras, but yet we're lenient. It can't be Torah law. Oh, each time we said, that unique halacha, that's a rabbinic halacha. But meaning, if it were Torah halacha, you would say, if you ate a kazayit b'chtech lapras, it would be a problem. But now let's go back to the main issue. So again, I'm going to keep repeating some basics every time, the points that you need to know going into the next section. Rav Dimi holds like Rabbi Yochanan. Heter mitzaref l'isur is a unique halacha by Nazir. Abaye holds heter mitzaref l'isur is by Nazir, and all across the board in all cases in the Torah. That was the whole gist of all his questions, or at least his first question, which then led him to other things. But he said, look, Rabbi Yochanan says lokeh, it was a different case, and it was heter mitzaref l'isur, and etc. Now, Rav Dimi said it wasn't heter mitzaref l'isur, but Abaye thought it was, and Abaye thought you learned to call it Torah kula. Now Abaye is going to make a total turnaround. And Abaye is going to say the following, and the Gemara is going to say, what on earth are you saying? Like, how can you possibly say this? This goes against everything you've been saying until now. And then they'll resolve it. But let's read it. Amalei Abaye. Why are you assuming that Mishrat, that we've been learning until now, everyone agreed. Remember, everyone agreed Mishrat was heter mitzaref l'isur. The question was, do we apply it just to Nazir, Rav Dimi and Rabbi Yochanan, versus Abaye and Ze'eri, who say it applies in other cases as well. So now all of a sudden, forget about not saying it's only unique to Nazir, right? Abaye says, not only against you that it's only unique to Nazir, and I think it's all a Torah Kula, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's not anywhere. Maybe you don't learn it from this pasuk. Maybe this pasuk comes to teach you something else entirely. Dilma litain tam ki ikar hu da'ata. Maybe it's coming to teach you a basic law in kashrut, okay, where mixed, milk and meat and other things like that, forbidden foods, that taste is like as if it's in there. Okay, what does that mean exactly? Let's try to define. And there's a whole big machloket how to define what tam kikar is. How is it different from heter mitzaref leiser? It actually sounds kind of similar because in both cases you have something that's asur mixed up in something that's bigger or maybe not bigger, maybe equal. We don't know, right? Tam kikar, we just said maybe heter mitzaref leiser has to be equal. But the point is, you're not only eating isser, you're eating a combination where a lot of it is heter. So what's the tam kikar means if the taste is in there, it's forbidden. So how is that different from heter mitzaref leiser? So I'll tell you what some of the commentaries say. Some of the differences are, one is tam kikar, we're going to see this case in a minute, if I soak grapes in water and then I remove the grapes, but the water now tastes like wine, that is tam kikar. So I could drink that wine, and if I drink a kazayat of that water wine, right, which has no grapes in it right now, just some flavor from it. If it gives flavor without actually being there, that's different from what we said before. Before we were talking about wine soaked in bread, the wine is actually there physically. But if I take it out, but the flavor is still in there, it'll be forbidden. Okay, that's tam kikar. So even without the actual object in there, because the taste of the object is in there, it's still forbidden. That's a possibility of what tam kikar is. Another difference possibly is heter mitzaref leiser could happen even if they're not a combination. Like obviously the wine soaked in the bread is there together, but it could be like when we talked about it on the altar, it could be you had some leaven mincha offering and you put it next to a matzah offering and you burnt it on the altar. That could be a case of heter mitzaref leiser even though they're not combined. Tam kikar is only in a combination. It's another possible difference. Anyway, again, there's so many things to go into today, and it's a long daf. So just know that there's a big debate about exactly how tam kikar is different from heter mitzaref leiser, and that's why, because they're somewhat similar, you're going to see all this overlap. Okay, it's because wine soaked in bread is also something that gave flavor. So if it gives flavor, this is, by the way, the whole basis for batal b'shishim. Nullification in 1 in 60 is because it no longer gives taste. If it gives taste, which is a higher ratio than that, then it's going to be forbidden because ta'am, the taste, is like the ikar. Okay, it basically turns this bread into wine rather than just being called bread. Okay, because it has the taste of wine, it's going to be forbidden. So basically, Abai says, why don't you just say that Mishra comes to teach something else entirely? So to which the Gemara says, stop from him. I don't understand, Abai. First you said, not only does Mishra teach you heter mitzaref leiser, but you can learn from there to the entire Torah. And from that, he questioned on Rav Dimi, who said it's only unique to Nazir. And from that, he brought all these questions against Rav Dimi. And Hadar Amar litain tam kikar, now all of a sudden he switches his tone and says, maybe it doesn't even teach heter mitzaref leiser. In other words, he's gone a total 360. He was on the one hand saying, it's not only heter mitzaref leiser, and that is the paradigm for all of the Torah about this law. And now all of a sudden he's suggesting maybe it's something else. So the answer, Batar Deshanele, after Rav Dimi answered him with all the questions and really showed that it could be limited only to Nazir, Amarle, he wanted to throw a different question at him, and maybe it made him reshift his thinking. Maybe he thought, maybe you're right. Maybe heter mitzaref leiser isn't learned from here to Kol HaTorah Kula. Maybe it is unique to Nazir. And therefore, maybe it actually, and then I'll go farther to say maybe it actually means something else entirely. So yes, Abaye does a switch. Okay? By the way, this whole question on Abaye seems, notice it's not in the name of anyone. It seems to be like a stam, where it's kind of just mentioned by the stam Gemara. Okay, I want to mention this because we don't have enough time to deal with methodology, but there's a course starting on Sunday that we're running with Rabbanit Michelle Farber, and one of the topics she's discussing, the first week is going to be all about Mishnah and ways the Gemara deals with Mishnayot and problems with Mishnahs and kind of all sorts of background about Mishnah in general. The second class is going to be all about the stam, and this is a good example of the stam, where usually it's a later addition. In fact, you could even say this was probably like a question someone wrote on the side. How could Abai possibly say this? Didn't he say that the other day, right? It would be like a question you might ask me in class and say, this doesn't make any sense. And then, maybe comes up with an answer, and then that ends up being incorporated into the Gemara. That's called the Stam. That's the whole second class of Rabbanit Michelle Farber. The third class is going to be all about halacha, how we get halacha from the Gemara. So it's a fabulous class, and I highly recommend you registering for it. It's all free classes, but it's you need to register. Anyway, I highly recommend it. It'll really enhance the learning that we're doing here. So after we dealt with that parenthetical statement, and that's why I wanted to say it's really the Stam coming in, because really this is probably a flow that kind of cut our flow. This was probably added in later. Comes Abai and he says, so again, let's just go back to Abai and read it in order. Abai says, how do you know that Mishrat is coming laheter with starif le'isser? Maybe it's coming for tam ki ikar, lichiditanya, as it says in a bright. It's not like Abai just pulls this out of a hat. He has a bright to rely on. Okay, Tanaitic source. He says, here, I'm going to show you. Someone else darshans this differently. Okay, here goes. Mishrat, litain tam kikar. In the bright it says, we're going to learn from Mishrat, little dogs of tam kikar. She'im sharan avim b'yayin v'yesh b'em tam yayin. This is what I told you. If you soaked grapes in water and you took them out, and now the water tastes like wine, hayav, and you're a Nazir and you drink it, you're liable. And from here, you learn to all Isurim Shabbatorah. So now we have, I just want to point out, two differences between this source that Abai is quoting and what Rabbi Yochanan said. Rabbi Yochanan had said, we learn from Mishrat, Heter Mitzaref Le'Isur, right? You can combine and have a complete shiur of a kazayit that's made up of both permitted things and forbidden things. Already at a kazayit, you're liable, but only for Nazir. Abai is suggesting, let's learn it from this Braita, where number one, Mishrat is going to teach us something different, Tam Kikar. Number two, we're going to learn from here to everywhere else in the Torah. So later in today's daf, we're going to question, why does this approach learn it for the entire Torah? This builds a paradigm. And Rabbi Yochanan's approach, which later we're going to see is Rabbi Akiva's approach, because we're going to find a root for that in a Tanaitic source. And the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Akiva is going to disagree on two counts. Number one, he's going to think it's only Heter Mitzaref Le'Isur, and number two, it's only in Nazir. Not only, I shouldn't have said that. It's Heter Mitzaref Le'Isur, and it's only in Nazir. So we're going to say, why doesn't he learn the Chol Torah Kula? Why doesn't he say this builds a paradigm? So there's two differences. Now, how does he know that we can learn the Chol Torah Kula from Nazir? Uman Nazir, now we're going to have a list. By the way, definitely the study guide today will be very useful. I both wrote the structure and also made some charts. This, for example, is charted out. Uman Nazir, she'eni suro isur olam, ve'eni suro isur ana'ah, ve'yesh ater li suro, asabotam kikar. Nazir has three things that we're lenient about. Number one, it's not forever. Normally, you could be a Nazir forever. Most Nazirim are not forever. Number two, it's not permitted to benefit from these things, meaning, if I own a vineyard and I have a winery and I sell grapes and I'm a Nazir, no problem. I could sell wine without a problem. Okay. I have no problem making money off of wine when I'm a Nazir. I just can't eat it. And I can there's a debate what exactly this is. I'll go with the interpretation that if I want, we've learned already, since it's a vow, I can undo my vow. So while I'm a Nazir, I can actually get rid of my Nazilut if I want. So that's all three leniencies. And yet, even though it's lenient, asabotam kikar, if there's a little bit of flavor of wine in something, I'm going to be forbidden to drink that. So therefore, kal vachomer, if it's lenient and it's going to be forbidden, obviously in things that are more strict, we're obviously going to forbid tam kikar. And that's why the rabbis learn from here, kol Torah kul. So the examples they bring are kilei kerem. If I have a mix, I plant next to my vine grain and they grow together, that's called mixed breeds. And it's forbidden. And not only is it forbidden, isuran isur olam, whatever grows from there will be forbidden to me forever. Isuran isur anaya, I can't benefit from it. I can't go selling it in the shuk. Ve'en ater lisuran, and I can never get rid of the isur, right? It's not the kind of thing I can undo. Therefore, wouldn't we assume then the law of tam kikar that applies by Nazir would apply here as well? Because this is much stricter in general. And Orla has only two of these things. Again, debate which two. Gemara doesn't go into it. On the chart, I put it as that Orla. Okay, what's Orla? I can't eat the fruits of my trees for 3 years. But after 3 years, the 4th year, it's called Netter Revai. There's unique laws. I can already eat it in some particular way. And the 5th year, I can already eat it no matter what. So therefore, people say, Orla is not Isur Olam because it'll eventually, after 5 years, I'll be able to eat them without a problem. It's a little tricky to say that because if I have Orla fruits from, let's say, year 2, those will never be allowed to be eaten. So you could say it's Isur Olam because the fruits themselves, but the concept of Orla will eventually go away. So perhaps that's why. Okay, it doesn't have one of them. There's a debate about which one. I won't get into the other opinion. Now, so until now, what we have is, okay, again, I just want to keep going back to the structure because it'll make it much easier. We resolved the last question on Rav Dimi. Then Abai started with a whole shift and said, why don't you learn Tam Kikar? Here's a braita that proves it. And that's what we're up to. And not only do we learn from Mishra Tam Kikar, like the rabbis do in this braita, we also apply it to the entire Torah. So he differs with him on 2 issues right now. To which they answer, Amar le'ahume Rabbanan, Rabbi Avahu says, someone comes and answers this question. Rabbi Avahu Kika Amar le Rabbi Akiva. We go back to Rabbi Avahu, who quoted this halacha in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and we said, Rabbi Avahu, who brought this halacha of Rabbi Yochanan that Rav Dimi was quoting, must hold like Rabbi Akiva, who disagrees with this braita. So now we're going to show that this entire thing is a Tanaitic debate. This debate that we've been having between Abai and Rav Dimi is actually rooted in a Tanaitic debate from generations before them. So now, hey, Rabbi Akiva, where do we know Rabbi Akiva from? Actually, we know it from our Mishnah, but they're going to reject that, okay? They're going to first suggest our Mishnah, then they're going to say, not necessarily. Can you learn it from our Mishnah? You probably can, but not necessarily. And therefore, they're going to find a different source. Hey, Rabbi Akiva. Hey doesn't mean hey, like we use the word hey. Hey means which Rabbi Akiva. And it doesn't mean which Rabbi Akiva, like out of, 3 Rabbi Akivas, which one? No, it's which statement of Rabbi Akiva is it referring to? Ilema Rabbi Akiva Tahacha, maybe it's Rabbi Akiva in our sugya. What would that be? Titnan, as it says in our Mishnah, you might remember this. The rabbis had said when it comes to wine, there was the Mishnah Rishona. Remember the early Mishnah? This is at the very top of Lamed Dalet Amud Bet. The Mishnah Rishona says, when it comes to wine, it's not a kizayit, it's a revi. Came Rabbi Akiva, and he disagreed on 2 points. He said, Afilu sharat pito b'yayin v'yesh ba kadei l'tzaref kizayit chayav. Even if you soak your bread in wine, and there's enough to make up together a kizayit, then you're liable. Number 1, he seems to be saying kizayit instead of revi'it for wine. Number 2, he seems to be saying heter mitzaref l'isser because it sounds like he's saying bread and wine of a shiur of kizayit would make you liable, and you don't need a whole kizayit of wine. Okay, so that's their suggestion. That would prove that, again, Rabbi Avahu, we can say, doesn't hold by this Mishra comes to teach you Tam ki ikar. Mishra comes to teach you heter mitzaref l'isser. And that's what Rabbi Avahu says. Rabbi Avahu says to Abaye, you're quoting me a braita by the rabbis. I hold like Rabbi Akiva, and that's a good answer. But which Rabbi Akiva? If you say Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah, Ditnan, Rabbi Akiva, Omer, Afilu shara pito b'yayin v'yesh bo kadei l'tzaref kizayit. That's what we just read in the Mishnah, Chayav, Umimai. You can't necessarily prove it from there. So at the time and right now, we said he's disagreeing about 2 things. Now they're saying maybe he's really only disagreeing about 1. Maybe he doesn't think heter mitzaref l'isser. Dilma hu di'ika kizayit ba'ena. Maybe it needs to be that the bread has a kizayit of wine soaked into it, and you're eating an actual kizayit, and not a combination of bread and wine that equals an olive. But and if you say, why is he telling us this? And he's not saying anything different from the rabbis. Well, maybe he's only arguing about the 1 point that it's a kizayit, not a revi. Maybe that's what Rabbi Akiva is saying. Again, it's probably not the simple reading, but it's a possibility, and therefore you can't necessarily learn it from him. And Rabbi Akiva to braita, but we're going to find Rabbi Akiva in a braita where it's very clear what he holds. The Tanya Rabbi Akiva Omer Nazir sheshara pito b'yayin v'achal kizayit mipat umiyayin chayav. So now we have a Nazir that soaked his bread and wine and ate a kizayit of bread and wine. That seems to say kizayit of them together, which means heter is mitzaref le'isser. When we count the kizayit, we even include the measurement of what was permitted, and you're going to be liable. Okay, so there you have it. We now say we end our questions of Abaye against Rav Dimi, because right now we have an answer. Abai said, after trying to say, maybe we learn from Mishrat, Heter Mitzaref L'Isur, again, I'm summarizing from the beginning, instead of saying Heter Mitzaref L'Isur, L'chol HaTorah Kula, learn from Mishrat to Kol HaTorah Kula, against Rav Dimi, who said only for Nazir, now Abai says, maybe we learn something else entirely. Maybe it comes to teach us that not Heter Mitzaref L'Isur, but maybe it comes to teach us Tam Ki Ikar, that if you just had the flavor of wine, it would be forbidden for the Nazir to eat a kazayit of something that has just the taste like wine, even though it doesn't have a kazayit of wine in it, or it doesn't even have any wine in it anymore, just the taste. Maybe that would be usher, and from that would be usher, he says. And we can learn, and that we learn from Mishrat, we learn from there to Kol HaTorah Kula, and that's the shita of the rabbis. Rabbi Akiva, Rav Dima is going to say, I don't hold by that approach. I hold by Rabbi Akiva, who clearly learns from Mishrat, Heter Mitzaref L'Isur, and that we found in the Bright. Now the Gemara is going to go off on questions. We're going to ignore now Abai Rav Dimi, but it's really the same machloket between the rabbis and Rabbi Akiva. So now we're going to go back to the base machloket between these two Tanaim and ask all sorts of questions. So the first question is, we're going to assume that Rabbi Akiva learns from Mishrat. We already know. Rabbi Akiva learns from Mishrat, Heter Mitzaref L'Isur. The rabbis learn from Mishrat, right? That and only, right? Only in Nazir. The rabbis learn from Mishrat, Tam Ki Ikar, and to the entire Torah. Now they're going to assume that Rabbi Akiva also holds Tam Ki Ikar. It's not like Tam Ki Ikar is something there's a debate about. So the big question is going to be, where does he learn Tam Ki Ikar if he can't learn it from Mishrat? That's question number one. So Amalei Rav Acha Bered Rav Avia Rav Ashi. So now we go a few generations forward and we have discussion between some rabbis and Rav Ashi. And they say to Rav Ashi, Rabbi Akiva the Kamokim Le'Lahai V'Chol Mishrat L'Heter Mitzaref L'Isur. Since he uses Kol Mishrat for that, Litain Tam Ki Ikar Menalim. Where does he learn Tam Ki Ikar from? And what we're going to end up is with a big ping pong, because if we say he learned Tam Ki Ikar from somewhere else, we're going to have to say, why didn't the rabbis learn Tam Ki Ikar from that other place? It's going to be the obvious question. So Yalef mi basar b'chala, lav tam ba'al mahu v'asul. He learns it from meat and milk. How so? There's two different ways to say this. Either if your milk, you spill milk into a pot of wine, what happens to, into a pot of meat, what happens to the milk? It disappears. Right? You don't see the milk anymore. It gets absorbed into the meat. And yet, if you eat this meat, it will be forbidden, again, assuming there's taste to it. Why is it forbidden? Is it not because of the taste, right? Even though the milk is not really there anymore. No, it's true, it's there, but it's absorbed and you don't see it at all. By the way, some people view Tam Ki Ikar as that. You just don't see it. It's not tangible. Some people say it's the opposite. You learn it from the milk. If you have a pot of milk and the meat drops in, piece of meat, what are you going to do, obviously? You're going to take that meat out, right? After your meat drops in, your pot is boiling on the stove, your piece of meat falls into it, and you see it in there, you're going to pull it out. But it already gave flavor into the milk. So here, that would also teach Tam Ki Ikar. It's going to be forbidden because you have the taste of the meat in that milk. So either which way, we learn it somehow from Basar B'Chalav, it's all about the taste. And it's forbidden. So Hachanami Lo Shna, so we should then learn from there to everywhere else. The Rabbanan, now you're going to have to say, why don't they learn it from Basar B'Chalav then? If it's so obvious it comes from Basar B'Chalav, they don't need to learn it from Mishrat. They can learn from Mishrat Heter Mitzaref L'Isur and learn from Basar B'Chalav. The Tam Ki Ikar. So they say, Mi Basar B'Chalav Lo Gamrinan Dechidush. Basar B'Chalav is a unique halacha. Batal B'Shishim, I told you, Batal B'Shishim is because there's not enough taste. As soon as it's higher ratio than that, more than 1 in 60 of the milk in it, it's going to give it flavor. Okay, so that's the whole idea of Tam Ki Ikar. It's all based on, this Shishim is based on Tam Ki Ikar. So now they say, the rabbis won't learn from it because it's a chidush. It's a unique halacha. Gemara says, my chidush, what's so unique about it? Well, what's so unique about basar? Basar itself is permitted. Halav itself is permitted. Milk, meat, all of them are permitted to eat on their own, but as soon as you combine them, they're forbidden. Maybe that's what's unique about it. But Ilema is always going to say, if you say this, we're going to reject. Why is that not a chidush? That we're going to take two permitted things, put them together, and they're going to be forbidden. Well, we have other places where that happens. For example, kilaim nami. Okay, what we just talked about, mixed breeds. You have a vineyard, you have your grains, you can grow them all separately, but if you grow them together, it's going to be forbidden. So kilaim nami hai lechude shari, these are permitted. Uba hade hadade asur, you put them together, they're forbidden. That means this is not such a unique halacha. Ela, so option number 2, why is basar b'chalav a chidush? But it's only forbidden if you cook it. If I soak a piece of meat in milk for the entire day, it would have to be less than 24 hours. After that, it's already considered like, not exactly pickled, but it's a word they use for pickling. Like it's already kind of a process has happened to it, which we consider like cooking. But if it's less than 24 hours, I soak a piece of meat in milk, I take the piece of meat out, and I go and I cook that meat, or I boil up that water, there's nothing wrong with it. Okay, certainly on a Torah level, I wouldn't go recommending doing that. But happens to be it's not asur, because the Torah says, Lo tevashel gedi b'chalev imo. You can't cook, right? You can't cook them together. It's only cooking. So that's what's unique halacha. So now we have a problem. Why? Rabbi Akiva wanted to learn from basar b'chalav tam kikar. And the rabbis, again, learn it from Mishra. Why did they learn it from Mishra? Because you can't learn it from basar b'chalav because it's a chiddush. So unique halachas you can learn it from there, but you won't be able to learn from there the entire Torah. So say this is unique in that way, therefore maybe it's unique in Tam also. To which they're going to question Rabbi Akiva. We're in this ping pong. Well, then Rabbi Akiva, nami basar b'chalav chidushu. Rabbi Akiva should also think basar b'chalav is a unique halacha. And how can you learn from it to anything else? So we're stuck. You can't learn it from basar b'chalav because according to everyone, it would be a chidush, a unique halacha, which means you can't learn from there to the rest of the Torah. So we tried to come up with where did Rabbi Akiva learn Tam Kikar? It's not from basar b'chalav. Next option, starting from Amud Bet. Yalav migiu le'ovdei kochavim. Remember, in the Torah, there's this whole section where they take the pots from the war against the Midyanim, and then they have to kosher everything. Why do they have to kosher everything? Because what's in a pot, certainly they cleaned out the pots. It's not like there was food in them, but there's taste absorbed in the sides of the pot. That is Tam Kikar. That's it. You have to write anything that was on the cook. You cook it on a flame. You have to burn it. Again, you have to burn it with a flame, right? This is how you kosher things. From there, you see it's obviously forbidden if you don't do that. Is it not just taste that is the problem? That as soon as you cook up your next pot of whatever, it's going to have non-kosher taste in the sides. It's going to come into your pot. So hachinami loshna. So that's where Rabbi Akiva learns Tam Kikar from, and therefore it's going to apply across the board. Obviously, we're going to say, okay, why didn't the rabbis learn it from there? Rabbanan nami tipukle mikiu le'avdei kochavim. Why don't they learn it from there? And why do they have to learn it from Mishra? And again, if we learn it from Giulei of the Kochavim, then you don't need it from Mishra, and Mishra can be free to teach Heter Mitzaref L'Isser, and that's not what the rabbis did. So Amalei Hatam Chidushu. Again, the rabbis are going to say it's a unique halacha, Giulei of the Kochavim. Why is it a unique halacha? And then obviously we're going to have to say, why doesn't Rabbi Akiva think it's a unique halacha? We're going to have the same ping pong as before. Here we're actually going to come to an answer. Deha b'chol Torah kula notein tam lifgam mutal. Giulei of the Kochavim asur. This is a basic halacha in kashrus, that if something gives bad flavor, it's not actually a problem. What does this mean? Well, the assumption is, in halacha, this comes out, after 24 hours, right? If you ever had a kashrus question, the first question that if you go to someone to ask, they'll tell you, when was the last time you used this for, right? Let's say you used your pot for your dairy pot for meat, cooked meat in it. They're going to say, when was the last time you used your pot? And if you say within 24 hours, it's going to be a problem because the assumption is the taste that comes out within the first 24 hours is still good taste. If it wasn't used in 24 hours, we're going to say, it's okay. Why is it okay? Because again, I'm not telling you any psak here, it depends on the situation, but we're going to assume that we're going to say whatever you cooked is okay because any taste of I can't remember which direction I went, but let's say milk that came out of the pot that went into your meat is going to be bad taste because it sat around for 24 hours in the pot. It already turns bad after 24 hours. That's why, by the way, whenever we kosher things for Pesach, we wait, we don't use them for 24 hours before we kosher them. It's in order that if there is any taste, it'll already be bad already. Okay, so that's a bit of a chumrah, but anyway, it comes from there. So now we say, everywhere else, notein tam lifgam is permitted. And here, the fact that we made them kosher, all these pots, that presumably were not used within 24 hours, in the past 24 hours, because otherwise you could have just waited, right? It's asur. So this is a unique halacha against what we know about general kashrus rules in general. So now, again, ping pong back to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, how can you learn from here? L'kol Torah kula, the Tam Kikar. Rabbi Akiva nami hachidushu. This is a unique halacha. How can you possibly learn from here? So Amar Rav Huna bar Chia, lo asra Torah ela l'kedera bat yoma. The lav noten tam lifkam. The assumption I just said a second ago is not true. Comes Rav Huna and he says, when the Jews were commanded to kosher the pots, it was only pots that were used within the last 24 hours. And because it's not noten tam lifkam. By Torah law, you only have to kosher pots that were used within the last 24 hours. Obviously, the rabbis decreed and said, you have to kosher them anyway, even if they haven't been used. But according to this Gemara, it was only pots that were used within the last 24 hours. And then it's not a chidush according to Rabbi Akiva. So now we're back to the rabbis. If it's not a unique halacha, then how can you learn from here, right? Then you should be able to learn tam kikar from here. Rabbanan, bat yoma nami efshar de lo pagma porta. The rabbis don't disagree with what Rav Huna bar Chia said, that really it was only pots within the first 24 hours. But what do they disagree about? Something very interesting. They say this is actually a unique halacha. Why? Because even within 24 hours, it probably gives out some bad taste. And therefore, theoretically, it should be permitted. The Torah forbade it. And therefore, it's a unique halacha because it doesn't really fit in with what we know about kashrut in general. So we end up, just to simplify matters, okay, after we establish that this whole debate is a machloket tanaim between Rabbi Akiva and the rabbis, do we learn tam kikar from Mishrat? Or do we learn from Mishrat heter mitzaref le'isser? We want to know now, where does Rabbi Akiva learn tam kikar from? Because we assume he definitely holds that. So and he definitely holds it in Kol HaTorah. So where does he learn it from? We tried from Giulei of Divkavim. We tried from Basar B'chala. We said that's unique according to all opinions. So you can't learn it from there. Then we end up concluding we learn it from the pots of the non-Jews that they had to kosher, which was only within the first 24 hours of use they had to kosher them. And then the assumption is that, by the way, you think, why didn't they just wait? Maybe they wanted to make dinner that night. Maybe they captured all this booty from the war and they wanted to cook up their stuff and they didn't have their own pots. Maybe that's what happened here. I don't know. They had to kosher them all. Why they have to kosher them? That is, again, a debate whether it's a unique halacha or not. Is it noten tam lifkam within the first 24 hours, in which case it would be a unique halacha? Or is it not noten tam lifkam within the first 24 hours, in which case it wouldn't be a unique halacha? So Rabbi Akiva doesn't think it's unique, and therefore you learn tam kikar from here. The rabbis think it's unique, and therefore they don't learn tam kikar. And that's why they need Mishra to teach tam kikar. That's where we went in this section. Next section. Now we're going to focus on, again, going back to our original debate. Rabbi Akiva says we're going to learn Mishra, heter mitzaref le'isser. Rabbis are going to learn tam kikar, but rabbis are going to learn it to the entire Torah, and Rabbi Akiva is going to learn it only in Nazir. So why that difference? So the Gemara says, again, Amar Rav Acha bereid Rav Avia Rav Ashi. Again, there's having a discussion generations after. Midrabbanan nishma Rabbi Akiva. We should really learn from the rabbis to Rabbi Akiva, meaning what? Lav Amar Rabbanan Hai Mishra Litain Tam Kikar Mikana Tadan L'Chol Isurim Shabbatorah. The rabbis say we learn Tam Kikar and from there to all the cases in the Torah. The Rabbi Akiva Nami Kamokim Leila Hai Mishra Leheter Mitzraf Lister Lema Mikana Tadan L'Chol Isurim Shabbatorah. So why doesn't Rabbi Akiva learn? We get that he learned something different, accept that. But why does he say it's only unique to Nazir? Why doesn't he say it applies across the board? So now, until now, we've been arguing about, in the beginning, we argued, why doesn't he learn from here to, how do we know he doesn't learn from the Kol HaTorah Kula, but not what's the reason why he doesn't learn from Kol HaTorah Kula? Now we have to get to why doesn't, right, again, before it was Rabbi Yochanan who quoted Rabbi Akiva, but now it's going to be why does Rabbi Akiva himself not learn from here to any other case? So which he's going to say, this is a principle, actually a debatable principle. Some people think it's 2, some people think it's 3. Anytime something's mentioned once in the Torah, we assume this can build a paradigm for all other cases. If something's mentioned in 2 places, there's already a debate. Some people say, if it's mentioned in 2 places, that already proves that you can't learn from here to Kol HaTorah, because it could have just said it in 1 place and we would have learned to everywhere else. So the fact that it says it in 2 means only in these 2 cases. Some people say 2, you could still learn, 3, you can't learn. But what's he saying here? This halacha of heter mitzaref le'isser appears in Nazir and it appears in Chatat. All of a sudden, we haven't heard this before. Okay, so if that's the case, it's mentioned twice. And if it's mentioned twice, that means you can't learn from here to the rest of the Torah. Nazir, so now we're going to see where do we learn these things? Nazir, Hadam Aram, we already been there, done that. We know where we learn it from. Nazir, from Mishra. Chatat Mahi, how do we learn it from the Chatat? Chatat is meat from a sin offering. Titania, Kol asher yigab b'psara yikdash. This is a pasuk by the Chatan. It says, presumably another piece of meat that touches the meat of the Chatat will become sanctified like the Chatat. What does this mean? So, Yachol afilu, here's a Tanaitic source, Midrash Halacha. Yachol afilu, you might have thought, afilu shelo bala. What if the two pieces were next to each other, touching a little bit, but none of, right, the meat that wasn't sanctified didn't absorb any flavor? You might have thought it's still us. It's going to be like the Chatat. No, Talmud Lomar bivsara. It has to be into its meat, meaning it has to really be absorbed. But once it absorbs taste, ad shivla bivsara, right? Bivsara means it has to absorb. By the way, they're going to learn from this. This is actually a very hard part about this. So again, they deliberate. This sounds like tam ki ikar because it has the taste. And later we're going to say the rabbis use this for tam ki ikar. But how do we get to heter mitzaref l'isur? So some of the commentaries say it must be, since we don't need a pasuk for tam ki ikar, it must be that this means heter mitzaref l'isur. It doesn't really say heter mitzaref l'isur here anywhere. But we're just going to take it right now as an assumption, especially because it's really late and this is a long, complicated thing. But take it as an assumption that this teaches you heter mitzaref l'isur. Okay, let's just take it as an assumption, even though it's a complicated assumption. Yikdash liot kamoa, shimsulahu yipasel, v'nkshera te'achel kachamor sheba. Okay, this means, this again is a side issue, not so much for our purposes, but it will be just like it. So that means if, let's say, the chatat meat that was absorbed into this piece of meat was chatat meat that someone impure touched it, or it was notar, it was leftover meat that has to be burned, then this meat has to be burned. If it can be eaten, then it can be eaten only according to the rules of how that meat can be eaten. In Jerusalem, let's say, and only to Kohanim, then that meat will have all those rules on. So basically, in a nutshell, Rabbi Akiva learns that it's this halacha of heter mitzaref l'isur. Again, hard to see exactly how he learns it from here, but he learns it from here. It appears by Chatat, it appears by Nazir. You can't learn from here to the rest of the Torah. The Rabbanan, who presumably are going to say this teaches you heter mitzaref tam ki ikar, why doesn't he say they're two ketuvim and you can't learn from here to the rest of the Torah? So he is going to say tzricha. Now, there's an exception to that rule that I said. Two ketuvim that come, it's no reason to bring it in both places. It must be just to say it's only in these two places. But if you couldn't have learned one from the other, if they're a tzricha, you need them each for their own sake, then it's no longer a shnei ketuvim that can't teach to anywhere else. So that's what the rabbis are going to say. And that's why they learn from tam ki ikar to kol Torah, even though it's mentioned by Nazir and it's mentioned by Chatat. If it had just said it by Chatat, you would have said, I can't learn from there to Nazir because Nazir is not kodshim, right? And Chatat is kodshim, the whole world of sacrifice, it's a whole different world. So you can't learn from one to the other. What if you had it by Nazir? Why couldn't you learn to kodshim? Well, Nazir, Nazir lo yafina, mishum dechamer isure da afilu kartzan asir le. Hilkach lo atimine. Even though we said earlier Nazir is lenient, here we're going to say Nazir is so strict because even the grape seeds are forbidden, even the skins are forbidden. That makes Nazir so strict that maybe you wouldn't be able to learn from there to Chatam. Okay, so that's what the rabbis, that's why they don't say this is a case of Shnei Ketuvim, that you can't learn to anywhere else. To which we're going to ping pong back to Rabbi Akiva. So why does he think it's not a tzricha? Rabbi Akiva, Amar lach be'lamai tzricha, you really don't need. Bishlamai kata brachman, I get what you're saying, that if they just said chatat, lo gamer nazir mineh, you couldn't have learned nazir from there. First part of what you said, I agree. But you really could have written in a nazir, and you would have known that by chatat it would be true as well. Because you do learn, we just said it earlier, Nazir is lenient, and you can learn to all sorts of other things. Obviously, Kachim is stricter. So therefore, he says you don't really need the Kachim Pasuk. The fact that it's there must be Shnei Ketuvim, and you can't learn from there to anywhere else. Now we have one other thing. Rabbanan Amri Lacha Hatat Leheter Mitzaref Le'Isur. So, and now we have to go back to the rabbis and say, he has a pretty good point. You really could have learned from Nazir. So again, Tam Ki Ikar, you have two psukim. Two psukim you shouldn't be able to learn to anywhere else. So the rabbis have a good retort. What do they say? Hatat teaches you Heter Mitzaref Le'Isur. Now he's changing his tone. Again, this isn't the rabbis. This is people speaking on behalf of the rabbis. We're going to assume that the rabbis learned two different things from each of these two psukim, and that's why it's not Sheikh Tuvim. Hatat comes to teach you Heter Mitzaref Le'Isur. Chulim mikochim lo gamrinan, and then you can't learn chulim from kochim. And therefore, and that's why he doesn't learn Heter Mitzaref L'Isur applies anywhere else. And Mishra, because remember, he disagrees with Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah. He doesn't think the bread-soaked wine is going to be forbidden. He doesn't hold heter mitzaref l'isser. Only in the world of Kodshim is heter mitzaref l'isser. That he learns from those pasukim. And Mishra is litain tam kikar. And then you have one pasuk, which means you're going to learn from there, l'kol Torah kulam. And Rabbi Akiva, just summarizing, this is just a summary verse, which summary line, which is helpful, and with this we'll end for today. Rabbi Akiva travayu leheter mitzaref l'isser v'havu l'shnei ktuvim v'im kecha v'chol shnei ktuvim v'im kecha re'im. So if we learn this daf backwards, we're going to learn it like this. Rabbi Akiva says, Mishra comes to teach you heter mitzaref l'isser. Chatat, we also have heter mitzaref l'isser from that pasuk we just learned. Those are two ktuvim. From here, we can't learn to anywhere else in the Torah, and that's why he gets to his opinion that this is a unique halacha specifically by Nazir. The rabbis who disagree and use Mishra to teach Tam Kikar, from there they learn to call it Torah Kula. By Chatat, he thinks heter is mitzaref l'isser. If you eat a kazayit of this combination of both pieces of meat, and one is heter, one is isser, you're going to be liable. Or you eat meat that has the absorbed of, it's a heter, but it has absorbed of isser in it, and you eat a kazayit of that piece of meat that has, heter, isser in it, but not a whole kazayit, we're going to say heter is mitzaref l'isser. But that is unique for kodshim. You can't learn from kodshim two other things. So that's the two basic approaches, okay? So quick review of how the flow of the daf went. We started with finishing up this third question on Se'achila pras d'oraita. Is it really d'oraita? And we brought another source. And in the end, we said, no, that source is d'Rabbanan, because Truma d'Rabbanan. Then Abai said, how do you know Mishra is teaching heter mitzaref l'isser? Maybe it's teaching Tam Kikar, which we then brought the Tannaitic source of the rabbis, which showed that. Then we went into all these questions. So our first question was, if Rabbi Akiva holds Mishra is heter mitzaref l'isser, where does he learn Tam Kikar from? We eventually concluded from the non-Jewish pots, which the rabbi said was a unique halacha, and we had this debate between the two. Is it unique? Is it not unique? Rabbi Akiva didn't think it was unique, and therefore learned from there to the rest of the Torah. Rabbis thought it was unique, and therefore didn't learn. And then we simply, and now this stuff is sounding a little simpler. Then we just went back to this question: if the rabbis learn Tam Kikar l'kol Torah, why doesn't Rabbi Akiva learn Mishra teaches you heter mitzaref l'isser l'kol Torah kula? And the answer was because there's chatat, and the two of them, you can't learn from two things, right? It's written in two places, you can't learn from there. And he didn't think it was a tzriche that you needed each one independently. And the rabbis eventually, after the back and forth, come to the conclusion that the chatat isn't about Tam Kikar. It's actually, that's about heter mitzaref l'isser, and Mishra is about Tam Kikar. Whereas Rabbi Akiva thinks both those psukim are heter mitzaref l'isser. From there, therefore, you can't learn to call it Torah kula. That's today's daf. Not an easy one. Took a little bit long to explain, but hopefully if you look also at the study guide, if that helps you, you can use that or listen again and go through. Have a great day, everyone.